This is a congregation that gathers in faith, not faith in one religion or one God or any one way. We gather in faith of the power of diversity, the power of love, and the hope of a world transformed by our care. We gather in faith in ourselves and those around us, not a faith that requires perfection or rightness in one another, rather a faith that in our shared imperfection we may learn to stumble and fall together, faith that we will help one another to rise and to try again and again. We are Unitarian Universalists. As is our custom, if you'd like to come and light a candle for whatever personal or private reason, please do so while we sit in stillness, listening to the prelude. Please stand in body or spirit for our chalice lighting and spoken affirmation. At this hour, in small towns and big cities, in single rooms and ornate sanctuaries, many of our sibling Unitarian Universalist congregations are also lighting a flaming chalice. As we light our chalice today, let us remember that we are part of a great community of faith. May this dancing flame inspire us to fill our lives with the Unitarian Universalist ideals of love, justice, and truth. Join me as together we remind ourselves of the affirmation that is a cornerstone of our free faith tradition. The words, should you need them, are in the morning program. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another. Please be seated. From the Wanderlust Worker blog by Robert Cannat, we hear these words about faith. Faith, at its core, is deep-rooted in the expectation of good things to come. It goes beyond hope. While much of hope lives in the mind, faith is steeped in the heart and the spirit. It can't be explained away by reason or logic or be understood through a single dimension. While life can be hard at the best of times, faith is the knowledge deep down inside that things will get better. It's taking the next step when you can't see the entire staircase. Simply put, life would fail to have reason if we didn't have faith. We couldn't drive our cars without faith that someone wouldn't cross the divider and crash into us. If we didn't have faith, how could we fly in an airplane, a metallic machine soaring 35,000 feet in the air? Without faith, how could we move from one moment to the next without completely second-guessing every last thing that we did? Without faith, we couldn't expect that things would turn out all right for us, no matter what the situation might be. Faith, then, is just as important as the air we breathe. While the oxygen in the air nourishes the body, faith nourishes the heart and the soul. It's the energy that courses through every single fiber and cell within our beings. It's part of every muscle and every strand of thought. It is the fundamental foundation of our existence. Please join the singing in our first song, number 368, Now Let Us Sing. Our first reading this morning is a poem by Sean Parker Dennison called Letter from Our Better Angels. Dear one, we have received your letter and we hate to tell you, not hate so much but are a bit afraid to say, we cannot grant your requests as stated, but can only remind you of familiar things. First, faith. Faith in yourself and trust in others. We know it can be terrifying to be vulnerable, but only when you share your softest side will we be able to break through. Next, hope. Hope is not an empty fairy tale. It is the true story of all the times human beings like you have found a way to create the future, though you didn't know how. And of course, love. Love that demands you cherish all people, not just yourself and safety. Love that is not satisfied until every argument ends abruptly when one child says, that hurts. There is so much to learn and relearn. The world teaches you to be hard, to negotiate and defend, to avoid giving too much and to the wrong people. There are no wrong people. You also are not wrong. And when you encounter the poor, the broken, the unhoused and unwelcome, you are looking, if you pay attention, at us, calling to you, calling you to answer your own prayers. If you want to change the world, first be sure you are changing yourself. Be tender, be kind, be at peace. Be all the things you wish for. Be your own better self. It isn't without cost, but it will be free. Our next song is number 123, Spirit of Life. That's my favorite song of ours. Edward T. Atkinson, offers words for our morning meditation. At this quiet time. At this quiet time and in this place of worship, we would seek to know more deeply what it means to love one another. We know so well our own needs. We know that we ourselves need understanding, affection, and recognition. Why is it then that so often we hesitate to extend these precious gifts to others? The cost of a kind word is small. The moment that it takes to listen could hardly be better used. A gesture of forgiveness can mark a new beginning. An embrace or a note of appreciation can convey crucial encouragement and comfort. And yet, so often we fail even within our own families to live by the sacred command that we should love one another. O Spirit of life and of love, strengthen our faith, increase our resolve to give more generously of ourselves. We pray for the courage to take the risks of love. We pray for the insight to see ourselves and others in perspective. We pray for humility and understanding, that we may always stand ready to forgive and begin anew. Amen. Please join me in a moment of silence. Our discourse this morning is Stages of Faith or Spiritual Development with Reverend Walter Norris.
If I read that program right, I have a new wife, but I don't want to wait till we get home. I don't know what Susie's going to have to say about that. Yeah, I know. I don't. This is a little funny story, but when she got sick a year ago, very, very sick, and was in ICU, and one day I got there early in the morning one day, and she said I could be the boss now. So when I told one of my granddaughters, and they said, "Papa, how long you think that is going to last?" It didn't last long, so I know what I have to do. But Ketanji Brown Jackson, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, said the other day that I guess it was after the investiture, and then she spoke to a group of supporters and people that had gathered to celebrate her moment. And she said that she now had a seat at the table. And I feel like I have that seat at this table within the Unitarian community. It's been a long time coming, but I've finally gotten there. So hopefully we'll be right on time if I don't keep talking too much. I never think I'm talking very long, and I said something to Susie. She says, "You always go over." So hopefully that won't be the case. I don't know if you're familiar with, he was a Methodist theologian, James Fowler. He actually taught theology and human development at Candler School of Theology, which is at Emory University. And I believe this is where Mark went to school. I think that he and I have had this discussion. But I think this is where Mark went. But James Fowler, very, very well known within the Methodist denomination, a little more liberal-minded than some. But even when I was at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, I went through a session where they discussed these stages of faith development, which that was interesting since that was a very, very conservative school. And many people don't. Evangelicals like churchy words. And James Fowler tried to use practical terms. But he developed this thing called stages of faith development. I always like to use spiritual development because it's not, these stages are generic. They're not for one religion or one faith orientation. They're for any. And it's broad-based. So it's just how humans develop in faith or in their spiritual development. We're very, very similar within all religions on kind of the ages or how our maturity levels go. And so James Fowler said that in these 6 stages, the first stage was what they called a pre-stage, and that was like 0 to 2 years old. So we know that, it's hard to imagine 0 to 2 years old with kind of a faith. But he says that this stage, these children have the potential for faith but lack the ability to act on it. Through loving care from parents and other adults in their life, young children start to build a lived experience of trust, courage, hope, and love. And he says they have some experience of faith, but it's a connection between themselves and their caregiver. So they really, they're just way too young. And then so in stage 1, that was the pre-stage. In stage 1, there's the intuitive, projective stage. And he says this is like the preschool age. He said the cognitive development of children of this age is such that they are unable to think abstractly. and are generally unable to see the world from anyone else's perspective. They have this one perspective, and that's as far as children can see with that. These children cannot think like a scientist, consider logical arguments, or think through complex ideas. Faith is not a thought-out set of ideas like we do, but instead a set of impressions that are largely gained from their parents or other significant adults in their lives. In this way, children become involved with the rituals of their religious community by experiencing them and then learning from those around them. So it's still, there's this connection to the people that they're caregivers, they're the person that raises them, this kind of path. And then he says, then there's this stage 2, which is the mythical or the literal faith. And these are generally children ages 6 to 12. So children at this age are able to start to work out the difference between verified facts and things that might be more fantasy or speculation. What do you think? What happens kind of at that 6 and 7-year-old that when they were preschool, they had a fantasy about something, and then they find out? What would that be? Santa Claus, exactly. Santa Claus. At this stage, children's their source of religious authority starts to expand past parents and trusted adults to others in their community, like teachers and friends. But so they're kind of moving beyond the parents here in some of their thinking. And for some, we want to control that age. We don't want them thinking beyond what we think. How many of you know the story? I mean, you've seen the movie or read the book. I think the book is called The Northern Lights, but the movie is called The Golden Compass. So this is a movie-going group, or? I think the church we went to, this Disciples of Christ Church in Dallas, and I swear nobody ever went to the movie there. I like to use movies as an example or something for us to see. But in The Golden Compass, if you remember the little girl, Lyra Blackula, the whole idea was the magisterium was the ruler. Now, this was a parallel universe when what we know is Earth today, but they had a parallel universe, very different from ours. But there was a thing called dust. You know what dust was? Free will. And so the magisterium did not want people to know about dust. And they would try to control the little kids, and they would send them off to these schools. And in the movie you see this, where they're sent out to this real northern, somewhere like up in the North Pole area, and to get them to where they couldn't have free will. So they tried to control that. But it's an impressionable age at this point. At this stage, faith is something to be experienced. At this stage, it is because children think in concrete and literal ways. Faith becomes the stories told and the rituals practiced. Many denominations or faith groups understand this. They really concentrate on children. I know in the Baptist church, a child could go to church almost every day. There was always something for kids. So they understood this, and they focused on that. The next stage is stage 3, which is the synthetic or the conventional faith. But let me get back to that 6-12. I just remembered something. At that age 6 to 12, when they do start to think about beyond beyond the fantasy and all that. One of our granddaughters we used to take, we belonged to the First Baptist Church of Plano for like 7 years, where I taught an adult class. And I don't think it was my speaking ability the reason they all came. I think they came because I was so different from the rest of them, and they wanted to just see what I would do next. Because I would come out with something, and they was like, oh my gosh. But this one granddaughter, we were talking to her and about how church was going or how Sunday school was going, and she said, it's going okay, but you know what? I'm getting tired of them always talking about Jesus. So, she starts to think a little bit beyond that. So then we get to that synthetic conventional faith, and that's the ages 13 to 18. So whoever can control that age, more power to them. So this is the teenage age. Some of these people at this stage are there. Actually, many adults are at this stage and never leave it. Okay? And it's part of the issue, I think, with some of the problems we have today. Like previous stages, people at this stage are able to think abstractly. What were once simple, unrelated stories and rituals can now be seen as a more cohesive narrative. So they start to put things together within a particular faith group. People at this stage claim their faith as their own instead of just being what their family does. So, churches or other religions that concentrate, there's a focus on this teenage years. So however that faith is claimed, usually still the faith of the family. So far we're still how the family has influenced all of this along the way. Issues of religious authority are important to people at this stage. For younger adolescents, that authority still resides mostly with their parents and important adults. For older adolescents and adults in this stage, authorities resides with friends and religious community. Well, we know in teenage years, who is the really important group for teenagers? Peers, exactly. Yeah. Peer pressure is high. So, they probably pull back a little bit from their parents or whatever. I know when my granddaughters got into this stage, I'm like, Lord, they don't want to do nothing with Papa anymore. They move beyond somewhat. They later come back a little bit. So, for all people in this stage, religious authority resides mostly outside of them personally. The next stage is what we call the individuative reflective faith. This is stage 4. It says this stage usually starts in late adolescence, 18 to 22 years old. People of many generations experience the kind of dissonance, kind of a lack of harmony to some of the concepts coming together with real questions of faith that one begins to address at this stage of development. People in this stage start to question their own assumptions around the faith tradition. So this is when kids start to question, well, why does my parent do this? Why does my parent do that? I don't have to do this. I don't have to do that. And I'm not going to. They go to college. They learn new ideas. Heaven forbid. I can remember some Baptist churches not wanting any preacher that had ever had a college degree because they didn't want them to know something different. Along with questioning their own assumptions about their faith, people at this stage start to question the authority structures of their faith. So here's that questioning that starts to take place. This is often the time that someone will leave their religious community if the answers to the questions they are asking are not to their liking. So if you read many of the articles that's going on about research, how Christianity is growing in the United States, and there is a moving back away from Christianity. All the data is that many younger people or whatever are moving away from the church, basically. Greater maturity is gained by rejecting some parts of their faith while affirming other parts. In the end, the person starts to take greater ownership of their own faith. So I don't know if you can remember how old you were when you started to pull back. I was, 19, I entered Mountain View College in Dallas, and it was the first semester that the school opened. In fact, the buildings weren't finished, so they had mobile homes and great big tents out in the parking lot. So this is West Oak Cliff area of Dallas, and I met, I guess the first day of class, I had this literature class, Albert, and I met this professor, and so that was fall of 1970. He and I are still good friends to this day. And we were completely opposite. I was this zealot, little Southern Baptist zealot, and he was far to the left, and then he made me read Henry David Thoreau, and I didn't want to do that. It did not fit in with my thing, but the seed of Henry David Thoreau in reading those books took place over time. It just sprouted. And that's part of my pilgrimage in life was that. Then there's this stage, the conjunctive faith. We start to pull together some things and connect. People do not usually get to this stage until their early 30s. This stage is when the struggles and questioning of stage 4 give way to a more comfortable place. Some answers have been found, and if the person at this stage is comfortable knowing that all the answers might not easily be found. I hadn't seen you raise your hand yet. Okay. 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 So, moving away from their faith because they had this realization that other people's faith might inform and deepen their own. Heaven forbid if we consider somebody else's faith. Now, y'all been doing the thing upstairs on Sunday mornings, the comparative religion? It's a fantastic thing. There's a website, or you can see it on Facebook or Instagram. It's called the Pluralism Project. Diana Eck is the head of that project, has been for years. She's been a professor at Harvard University School of Religion for many years, and she has headed that up. She's originally a Methodist, but look at that Pluralism Project. That's an interesting project. Okay. The sixth stage, and that really fits in with the Unitarian Universalist Church. The sixth stage is the universalizing faith. So, it is rare a person reaches this stage of faith. James Fowler describes people at this stage as having a special grace that makes them seem more lucid, more simple, and yet somehow more fully human than the rest of us. People at this stage can become more important religious teachers because they have the ability to relate to anyone at any stage and from any faith. They're able to relate without condescension, but at the same time are able to challenge the assumption that those of other stages might have. People at this stage cherish life, but also do not hold on to life too tightly. They put their faith in action, challenging the status quo and working to create justice in the world. So, who would be some examples of that? About Martin Luther King? He's an example. Gandhi? I know somebody mentioned Mother Teresa as an example. I'm going to give you a couple of examples that I know of. There was a guy named Miles Horton, and he was the head of what's called the Highlander Folk School, and that was in Tennessee, Albert. Starting in the 40s, he was an integral person during the Civil Rights Movement. He's a Caucasian guy. He was educated at Union Theological Seminary. Rosa Parks spent a week at his school before she sat at the front of the bus. Right before she sat at the front of the bus. And he used to bring in many African Americans to teach them how to read and write so they could vote. It's kind of a homegrown thing. And of course, he was forced to close the school somewhere along the way because he believed in equality, and this was the Deep South, and they didn't like him. They called him a communist. He was investigated by J. Edgar Hoover, on and on and on. They did eventually were able to move this school somewhere else before they actually had to close it, but it had a big impact within the civil rights movement. The other guy is a guy named Clarence Jordan. Anybody heard of him? Clarence Jordan lived in Georgia. He was a Baptist minister. In 1942, he moved into the region of close to Americus, Georgia. You know Americus, Georgia? You know Plains, Georgia, right? That's Jimmy Carter's place. Susie and I used to go visit there. We hoped we'd see Jimmy Carter walking up down the street, but no such luck. We tried many times. My son lived pretty close to there, so that was why we would go. But Clarence Jordan was a pacifist, actually, but he moved in to this area and started a farm called the Koinonia Farm. The idea was that anybody could come and work on that farm and get equal pay. So if you're talking about the 1940s and the 1950s, white and African Americans working together, and the African American is making as much as the white person, that was a problem. And so, same thing that Miles Horton experienced, Clarence Jordan did too. Now, Clarence Jordan later writes a book called The Cotton Patch Gospel, and you may have heard of it. But he would teach, at this community. People would come and they would work and they would live there. I guess some people might want to say it's like a utopian society, but not necessarily. Martin Luther King and his family, at times when he was being threatened, they would come and stay at this farm. But Clarence Jordan would teach weekly, several nights a week. The interesting thing about these people we've talked about so far is they have an impact on a wide range of people. I mean, some of the people I've mentioned are worldwide known. So their impact is really big. So Clarence would do this teaching, and as he taught, there were two young guys, that would come and sit and listen to him. This went on for several years. Those two guys, one's Jimmy Carter, the other one's Millard Fuller. Everybody know Millard Fuller, Habitat for Humanity guy? So the justice thing is central in this sixth stage. Now, the perfect example for me is not somebody that no one's ever heard of this guy, but a guy wrote a book about this particular person. There was a guy named Victor Herman. His family went to the Soviet Union in the 1930s. His dad worked for Ford. Ford Corporation sent over so many people to the Soviet Union to work. Now, they had to be people that would be able to deal with the Soviet Union in the 1930s. But Victor Herman's family moved there. He lived there, and he was all part of the Soviet life at that time. But in 1938, in the late 30s and into the 40s, Stalin started having all these people jailed into the Gulag, which was their prison system for dissidents, or anybody that didn't go along with what Stalin wanted. And Victor Herman said he was in that prison for so long, he wrote this book called Coming Out of the Ice, if you ever want to read that. He said he was in there for just a couple of days, and he thought he was going to go flat crazy because he was in a little cell with 16 guys, and they couldn't do anything. They had 2 little benches, and these 16 guys had to sit in that small cell 24 hours a day. He said the only reason he didn't go crazy was because of a guy they called the elder. And the elder would make them switch every couple of hours, move around from one seat to the other so that their bodies didn't get so stiff. The elder was the guy who sat next to the bars where the Soviet soldiers would give them the food or water or whatever. And he's also the guy who sat by the bars. So when the Soviet soldiers would come through and they with their billy clubs and they'd hit and try to beat on people, he took all the blows. He's also the guy who sat by the latrine bat to keep the other guys from having to smell so much. And when they passed out the food, he let no one eat till everybody had their food. So he kept these, it's like his life, those guys' lives depended on that one guy, and he made sure everyone, he tried to protect them. He made sure everyone had food. And so that's my kind of person. No one knows who he is, but he had an impact. And he had an impact on this one guy who later writes a book about it. But it's an interesting story about the elder, but that person had an impact. So many of I think that's the idea here, is that so many people don't get to this stage because justice does not become a part of their life. And we expand that, we teach that, we live justice in our lives. And it is to be propelled throughout society. So justice is an important thing for me. I know it is in this particular church or in denomination, but it's when we become so focused on justice that we've reached this faith, this stage in our life. So does anybody have a question about any of this, or you just, it's okay? Or
what did you say that book was called?
well, Victor Herman wrote a book called Coming Out of the Ice. If you've never read anything about the Gulag, Anne Applebaum wrote a book. I don't know if any of you know her. She writes for The Atlantic. I see her every now and then on MSNBC, but she's one of my favorite writers. But she's written several. She wrote a book about the Ukraine, which is important to read today, but it's happened back during the 1930s, and it was called the Holodomor. But in this book she wrote about the Gulag, you see the idea about the elder, because she addresses in each cell there was a guy or a woman, whatever cell they were divided up into, there was an elder. And the elder kind of ramrodded or whatever, but this particular elder, he saved the lives of many of those people. But if you've never read about Miles Horton, he's a good one to read. And these all come from, I think, some of my graduate work at SMU through human rights. It's important to me for that. Okay?
I absolutely love this discussion. I feel like I'm stuck in between stages 4 and 5 that kind of question a whole lot of this, and but yet I want to progress and have more of a faith that I feel comfortable with. Do you have any thoughts on readings or how to move forward?
Well, it took me many years, Michelle. I mean, I think my family thinks my wife made me the way I am. it's not my fault, you know. Well, so Susie and I married when got married when we were 45, and I guess not long after that. But I was already there. I just kept it quiet, I think. I think you have to be, you have to be willing to question or go against. As soon as one of my brothers found out I was at the Unitarian church, he just had a fit. So.
Michelle, I've got one piece of advice. We have a curriculum called Building Your Own Theology through the UUA, and it's a long course, but it really is very, very helpful for determining what your belief system is. But I also wanted to bring up last Saturday, not yesterday, a week ago, Austin College had a 2-day summit on confronting racial violence. And so I had learned about, they had leaders from kind of the southern United States come and talk about different ways that they're confronting racial violence. And I learned about an Institute for Common Power where they are taking educators and they're taking them on a civil rights tour, but they're also teaching them about how to write curriculum that teaches anti-racism without it being at risk of being labeled critical race theory. So they're doing a huge public service to the education system, and they also fund the education for the instructors, knowing that teachers are underpaid.
No. I thought of you. I liked your comment at the stage where the church, whatever the faith, says you can't learn anything else.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
it.
yeah.
The Universalists were the ones who said you have to learn about something else, even from the beginning. And as they grew to be the third largest Protestant denomination, they still had the Jesus and the gang, but everyone could interpret it the way they wanted to. Mm-hmm. My grandfather used to write down how long it took the Universalist minister to pray. He timed them during the service. And growing up as a Unitarian, and my mom's side were Universalists, but there was no Universalist church in Madison. It just seems so strange that people wouldn't want to know. They just wanted to be told. And I never really could grok why that was so important for them. But it certainly was.
I would agree. I think I grew up like that people want to be told. Maybe that's part of how we do it, is we tell people, you have to, I don't want to tell you how to do anything, on this faith. You experience it yourself. You find your path. I mean, you can look at others who have gone on these various paths and come to enlightenment. Enlightenment's another part of another word that's used in this sixth stage, in this universalizing faith. So in the Buddhist religion, they strive to come to a certain area. I got to watch. I didn't get to go to at SMU when he was there, but that day I was able to live stream him on the computer, and that was the Dalai Lama. This happened about 6 or 7 years ago. It was a remarkable talk that he did at SMU, just remarkable. And I think everyone, went away from that talk that day delighted. So, well, I guess that's it.
Well done, dude.
Enjoyed it.
That was wonderful. Thank you. Our offering words this morning are adapted from Let Us Look into Our Hearts by Eric Walker Wickstrom. It is said, the Lord loves a cheerful giver, yet will accept from a grouch as well. As we prepare for this morning's offering, may each of us look into not just our wallets or our checkbooks to see how much we have with us. Let us also look into our hearts and see what is available there. How much love, how much generosity, how much faith, how much gratitude, how much hope, and let us take our offering from that account. For the gifts which we receive and the gifts which we ourselves are, may we be truly grateful. May we be committed to using these gifts to make a difference in the world, to increase love and justice, to decrease hatred and oppression, to expand beloved community, to share and to keep sharing as long as ever we can. Amen. The bowl awaits you, or you may donate online.
Please join in singing hymn number 301, Touch the Earth, Reach the Sky.
Touch the earth, reach the sky, walk on shores while spirits fly, over the ocean, over the
I invite you to stand in body or spirit for the benediction and extinguishing the chalice. May our faith sustain us, written by Jim Wickman. May our faith sustain us, our hope inspire us, and our love surround us as we go our separate ways, knowing that we will gather again in this beloved community. Amen. Please join me in saying the words to extinguish our chalice. The words, should you need them, are in the morning program. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.